Good morning. Thanks for listening to KPCC. I'm Jessica Yellen in for Larry Mantle. Well, we love the LA police officers and firefighters who are working hard on the job, but we want to talk about the ones who aren't working so hard and are still getting paid. A new audit shows an explosion in the number of questionable workers' comp claims by city emergency workers. The study, which is by the city controller, found 2/3 of city firefighters and 60% of police officers filed an on-the-job injury claim in the last 3 years, and nearly half of them filed more than one claim. The cost of these claims increased 35% in the last 5 years, adding up to a whopping $28 million a year. Now, if you think that's outrageous, listen to this. According to the audit, most of these injuries did not occur on the job or during an emergency. We'll speak with City Controller Ron Galprin, and if you have questions for him or ideas for changes, you can call us at 866-893-KPCC. That's 866-893-5722, or weigh in with your comments on the AirTalk page at kpcc.org. Controller Galprin, thanks so much for joining us. And let's just start with, why did you think to investigate these claims to begin with?
Well, I wanted to investigate these because of the costs of workers' comp that have been growing in the city. And actually, in the course of the past 4 years alone, it's cost the city about $800 million for both our sworn officers as well as for everybody else. That added up to nearly 29,000 claims filed by city employees. And more than 60% of these claims were made by our sworn police and fire department personnel.
It's astonishing. These numbers are mind-blowing. Would you give us a sense, before we get more into the numbers, of some of the stories behind these claims? We're seeing that claims are coming in from injuries that are not sustained on the job. What kind of injuries have you seen reported?
Well, what we did is a thorough data analysis with data that has been gathered by fire department as well as police. And one of the things we want them to do is to gather better data. But from what it is that they do have, they've done a pretty good job of preventing injuries of those who are on the job when they are fighting crime or when they're going into a burning building or when they are going on a paramedic call. The problem, however, is all those other kind of injuries, be it a slip and fall or, for example, sports-related injuries. They spend time, and understandably so, trying to stay physically fit, but then there are a lot of sports-related injuries. In the case of the fire department, 13% of all the workers' comp claims were related just to exercise.
My gosh, not on the job. I read about a bench pressing injury.
There's bench pressing injuries. There are handball and basketball injuries. There are even categories of injuries for eating, for doing dishes.
Sorry, how do you get injured eating?
Preparation. Well, there are a lot of different ways to get injured, needless to say, and that's why we were very concerned that not enough action is being done to identify and prevent the more mundane injuries.
So let's look at how this claims system works. What is supposed to qualify as a legitimate injury?
Well, first of all, anything that occurs on the job is considered a legitimate injury. Moreover, state law has for our sworn officers a whole set of presumptive injuries, things that whether they happen on the job or not are considered to be on the job injuries, and these are particularly health-related, for example, or breathing-related for firefighters. And we've got an amazing group of firefighters in the city of LA. We've got fantastic police officers as well, and we want to make sure that they are indeed staying safe and that we are reducing the rate of their injuries and also making sure that there are not illegitimate claims being made. It should be noted, by the way, that we did a survey both of the fire and police departments, and 45% of the persons who were answering from our survey from the police department agree that there are excessive claims. And in fire department, about 1/3 of those who answered our survey said that they were aware of those who had filed questionable claims. And again, that's a problem. So
I'm reading some of the comments online, and one of our listeners saying, are we supposed to be surprised by this? The host is implying we should be. So I guess, as you're saying, it's so widespread and well known. Someone else writes, I could have written this headline 15 years ago. I guess it's a culture of accepting questionable claims?
Well, I think it's a culture of many things. Part of it is accepting claims that may or may not be legitimate. Part of it is also that there has not been nearly enough effort to reduce the number of injuries that come, for example, from sprains and strains. There's a lot of training for firefighters, let's say, when it comes to breathing apparatus, but there's basically none for their lifting, and they do a lot of very heavy lifting, which can lead, in fact, to very legitimate kind of injuries.
And so I was surprised when you say that so many emergency workers acknowledge that their peers are submitting questionable excessive claims. Have you found that any of the officers or firefighters you spoke to are ashamed by this?
Well, there are many of them who are not happy about that. And again, the vast majority of people who are working as firefighters, as police officers, I really believe are in it for all the right reasons. They work really hard. And so if they see one of their colleagues doing something that is less than appropriate, of course they're going to be unhappy about that. And that's part of why we believe that the culture has to be changed. And we put forward a whole bunch of different recommendations, which, by the way, I'm pleased to say both fire and police departments are buying into, that relate to prevention, to accountability, and to much better use of data.
I want to note that we asked the fire department to comment, and they declined. The LAPD assistant chief said they're trying to reduce injuries.
Well, the fire chief actually was with us at our press conference yesterday, and he described our report, which I was very gratified by, as a blueprint for the change that they want to implement. And I have to say the top brass of both fire and police were very cooperative with us in providing us with the data and with the feedback that we needed to complete our audit.
I want to remind listeners you can join the conversation at 866-893-KPCC. That's 866-893-5722. Mr. Galperin, you argue that tax policy on workers' comp actually incentivizes emergency workers to apply for it. Would you explain?
Sure. This is actually something that has been around for quite a while and is enshrined in state law, among other places. And essentially, when you go out on IOD or injury on duty, what happens is that you can get the same pay that you got before as gross, except that it's not taxable. It creates a very, very perverse incentive for those who may not want to come back to work so quickly.
Now, are the departments doing enough, in your view, to investigate fraud?
We don't believe that that's the case, and we also don't believe that they're doing enough in terms of prevention. So here's some of the things that we've recommended that be done. Obviously, better investigations. Also, there are third-party companies that the city hires that process these kinds of claims, and we've made a number of recommendations actually to previous audit about what they need to do. We also want better training, wellness programs. We want to see safety committees, which have existed in the past, revived. We want to see fitness incentives. Also to reevaluate what sports are and are not appropriate, because if there are sports court injuries, for example, that are costing us millions of dollars, we got to look at whether those are the most appropriate to be engaging in the workplace or not. And then finally, better policies for return to work. Because there are people who are, in fact, very legitimately injured, and then they try to get back to work, and it takes a long time for them to actually see the paperwork processed and for them to get the care that they need.
We have some comments online. One listener says, whoever is involved in the compensation system that is authorizing payouts for sports or exercise injuries ought to be fired. Pippi Detman writes, the entire workers' comp system needs a massive overhaul, starting with, I'm not going to say the word she uses, people who are passing these claims through. It's not just cops and firemen, it's also everyday people. But, Controller, there's also a special law that was written in the Depression era that allows more latitude, as I understand it, for emergency workers filing claims. Would you explain?
Well, there are a number of different laws that provide for more latitude, including what I mentioned a little earlier about the presumptive injuries that are essentially enshrined in the law as being presumptively and having occurred in the workplace, whether or not they did occur in the workplace.
But there's an effort to...
Very legitimate reasons for that and historic reasons, but that doesn't mean that we can't make an improvement in the way this works.
And You also point out that the medical bills, not their workers' comp, but the medical bills are paid out of a city fund and not by the departments themselves. You recommend that the departments have to pay medical bills instead. Why do you think that would make a difference?
Well, all of the claims are actually paid through the general fund of the city. And what we're recommending is that there at least be some component whereby the department ends up being on the hook for that and where it affects their budget. Because if that's the case, it will change the game, as I believe. Moreover, there also has to be an accountability for those who are the supervisors and the managers, because we look at supervisors and managers and we evaluate them in a variety of different ways of whether they're doing their job well. One of the ways we've got to be able to evaluate them is, are they keeping workers' comp costs under control? And if they're not, they need to be held responsible for it.
Great. City Controller Ron Galperin, thanks for your work on behalf of the taxpayers.
Thank you so much. And there's lots of information about this audit, as well as a great deal of data about the city and how much we pay to everybody and what we buy, and a virtual checkbook of the city.
Great. Online at your website, I bet. Thank you.
Exactly.
All right. That's City Controller Ron Galperin. And coming up next, it is truly a revolution.